Would we be better off without the MCU? Hello and welcome to Strong Collectors Comics. My name is Jordan and I'm joined today as ever by my plucky co-host Dakota, where we are going to attempt to answer that very question I just asked. Now, yes, there have been many great things about the MCU. We've gotten many projects, many moments. However, it's come to our attention that maybe not everybody views what the MCU has done, both for comics and maybe for movies in general, as something that's positive. Now, Dakota, in the pros column, right, we've got a lot of cool stories. We got people being introduced to new characters. But I guess you could see some of these as cons. So if you think of the immediate potential drawbacks to the MCU, is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Well, if you remember in our previous episode, I had mentioned kind of how the movies have seemed to have shaped some of our characters. So the example I used in the last episode was Doctor Strange. Like Doctor Strange in the comics has taken on much more of a Benedict Cumberbatchy type of feel since we've seen him in the MCU than what he maybe was in like his classic state. And I think again that also plays over in just like an overarching stories and everything, because I think we see maybe like redos of maybe like big events that happened in comics that the movies then take, and then the comics are like, oh, we're going to do this event again, but it more so mirrors what happened in the movies.
That's a good point.
And I think just like taking the characters out of it and like making it more of like us as the enjoyers of comics. I don't know if it becomes there's like you said, there's the two sides of like now I'm a little bit maybe cooler because I know kind of like when Thunderbolts are coming out, like I kind of know what these characters are about. I kind of know like, oh, maybe they're going to take like a Dark Avengers twist on this, or this is going to happen. You know, Secret Wars is coming out. I can kind of speculate because I've read the books and kind of know what's going on with the characters of how things might happen. And that maybe like makes me a little bit more relevant in conversations with non-nerds. But then it kind of takes away my hipsterness of like, I'm into this thing that's kind of my own. Like, if I go talk to, you know, the non-comic readers, maybe they're kind of like, oh yeah, I was reading these like movie theories about this character and this is what they're about. And I'm like, well, but that's not really the comic version. And now there is kind of that argument of like, is the movie version that character or is the comic version that character? Because one is kind of more popular. One is kind of what it came from. But what you know what I'm saying here?
A little chicken or a little Galactus or the cosmic egg, as it were.
Right. Yeah.
That's a deep cut because Galactus hatched out of a cosmic egg. You can look that up. That's real. Okay, so yeah, I think that is, you made two good points there, and I see both of them. Where you do see, in many ways, it can feel like now the comics are used to sell the movies rather than, hey, we're making these movies, go check out these awesome comics, right? And I do think there is probably something to that. I mean, I think the really only like movie adaptable / will be adapted storyline I think of since the MCU mainly is going to be Secret Wars, like 2015, right? Because that's obviously part of the multiversal stuff. I guess maybe like Avengers versus X-Men, but I'm guessing that's going to be just, if that happens at all, just the basic concept. You know, it's not like Civil War or, you know, even like what you could have done with a Secret Invasion or Infinity Gauntlet. You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh, since the MCU started, here's this comic storyline we wrote that we're going to see adapted into the movies, right? Like no one's going to go see the Blood Hunt movie from last year, you know, based on all the vampires take over the planet, and you know, and then when you get, for me, I never liked that, where it's like, go read the TVA comic. And now the TVA is in the comic books, but it's just like the TVA from the MCU, which the TVA has kind of been like hinted at and referenced, but it was not like a big part of the story. But now it's like all the trappings of the TVA from Loki get transplanted into the comic books, which for me is kind of jarring. Like, I really would rather those be separate, like you said, of like, the movies are the movies and they're doing their thing, and then the comics are theirs, but of course you get, you know, the corporate synergy thing. So I could see where that's something that stands out to me as a bit of a drawback. But what do you got any thoughts on that? So I
Yeah,
got your other point I
would
want
say-
to address too, but
Well, yeah, go ahead and stick with that
Okay.
before I.
all right. Well, file it away.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think your other point too, because when I started high school, it was like I would bring comic books to school. I'd read like literally individual issues or graphic novels, and it was kind of like, what are you doing reading comic books? I was like, well, these are cool. I could talk a little bit. These might be coming up. By the end of high school, there were people who I think would have years ago been like, what the heck are you talking about, wearing like a Captain America shirt? It's like, oh, dude, I love Steve Rogers. I love Captain America. It's like, dude, you like Chris Evans. You don't really know. You don't know
Right.
Cap like I do, or like, I love Iron Man. It's like, you like Robert Downey Jr., man. You haven't read Demon in a Bottle, dude. So
Yep.
it's like, I do remember that being a real thing. And like, honestly, kind of processing through that, because it'd be like, on the one hand, you're kind of like, oh, I know these characters. I love them. And it's like, how much do you really... But also, there was very cool things about seeing everyone I knew be like, dude, what's going to happen with Thanos? And it's like, this is so wild to think everyone knows who Thanos is and that he's from the moon of Titan and, and like Doctor
Right.
Strange and all these like deep cuts that for me would have been like, there's a very small group that I could like have a conversation about that with. So I do think there was a real excitement there. But also maybe it was more of an internal, like, this is my thing. I'm trying to protect this, specific interest I have, and maybe a little bit of Marvel gatekeeping, I guess, is
Right.
maybe the way to put that.
Yeah. I was gonna say kind of going off of the movies influencing comics. I think most people, like comic wise, would prefer it to be this way of the comics influencing the movies. But I think one of the critiques that I don't necessarily jump on board with is when somebody's like, oh, this is whatever it is, like Infinity Gauntlet or Civil War, and it's like, oh, this isn't how Civil War played out in the comics, how it's happening in the movie. Which maybe that's a bad example, because I would have liked to actually see Civil War done a little bit more comic-y in the movies, and like could have been a whole phase. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think kind of my point there is I personally don't want to see like a shot-for-shot remake of the comics in the MCU movies.
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of a little bit boring. Of like I love the story. I read it. It was cool. I'll reread it often. But then I go watch the movie and I'm like, we're just following exactly what's happening, and it's I've already seen this movie in my head. And usually, like, you read Harry Potter, you read other like Lord of the Ring. I haven't read Lord of the Rings, so I don't know if that's true or not. But you read those books, and those usually are better in your head reading the book than they are when they get to screen, because they're trying to be that.
Yeah.
Being your own thing in the movie, I think, is a little bit more interesting, where they like put their own spin on it. They're like, oh, we can't really do everything that happened in the comics because I have to have real people doing these poses and stuff, doing these fight scenes. Twist it how you need to make it adapt for a movie, and then that makes it a little bit more interesting. But I think, kind of like, bringing it back to earlier, I think when they try to like go backwards with that and they say like, oh, like now let's make the comics like those movies, then I think you're kind of like dumbing down the comics, because the comics you could do more with, because it's, issues keep coming, and there's thousands of Batman comics, thousands of Captain America comics, like it keeps going, so you can tell bigger, longer, better stories, I think, in books than you can in the movies. But I don't think they're doing that.
Yeah, and I think you can go, again, in different directions with that, where it's like, yeah, I do agree with you. I think when people are, like, even with Civil War, it's like, for the time the MCU was at, I think it made a lot of sense for them to do Civil War the way they did it. And like with the library characters, they're like, are we going to keep Robert Downey Jr.? Well, let's try to do some version of this, because you needed Cap and Iron Man. So, yeah, for me, it's like that would have been a cool one to build to and have the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, all that stuff. But I don't even mind them being like, we're taking elements from multiple things and kind of, to me, it's almost like, and I remember I thought of this very early on in the MCU, as almost like an Ultimates version of the comics, where it's like, there's some basic plot points, there's some key characteristics and characters, but they're kind of remixed, they're put together in new settings. Which, yeah, for me, I agree, it was more fun to have that more unexpected quality of like, oh, I don't know exactly where this is going to go. I have ideas, but you can kind of do your own thing. And I think it allowed for some unique perspectives, like on different stories, like the Infinity Gauntlet stuff being Infinity War. Like, I think changing the Thanos motivation, like, I think you got some, rather than like, oh, I'm obsessed with death, so I want to kill half the universe. Like, I think they did a cool twist of it's like, sort of more that, which side is he on? Is he trying to save the galaxy? Some of that stuff can get a little bit, like, somewhat deeper if you get a new perspective, or like tying Vision into coming from Jarvis, and Jarvis creates Ultron, which creates Vision, and like that's like, oh, that's kind of a cool thread that you don't really get in the comic books with Vision. So I think things like that, yeah, I like to see newer stuff. And then I think there's that other part too of, do you watch the movies and then just be like, okay, I get this character, I don't need to? Like, does that make it harder to get into comics? Or are you more likely to say, oh, I really like this character, I'm going to go pick up a comic book? Because maybe if you pick up a comic and it's not just like the movie, maybe you're more put off to it, of like, oh, this doesn't quite line up. But I think if it can motivate you to go into the comics and then be like, oh, this was the comic Civil War, and this is the comic version of Secret. If you haven't read Secret Invasion, you only watch the show, please go read the comic, because Dakota and I could do a whole series on how we dropped the ball on Secret Invasion a little bit.
Well, I think you keep forgetting that there was a second Secret Invasion that I think was more based off of what the show was based off of.
Oh yeah, okay. So go back to the original Secret Invasion from a couple years ago in 2007.
A couple of years ago in 2007.
the recent one from 18 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it would be, and I don't know why they haven't done this, probably just distribution wise, but figure it out. It's been 20 years of Marvel movies. They could have figured it out by now, but I think they should be putting out comics with the movies, like you were saying, but like at the movies. So like, I go watch the new Thunderbolts, I can go get my popcorn and also get my Thunderbolts reprint of some significant issue that tells me a little bit about, maybe not the exact same team, but it's a Thunderbolts comic, or maybe they would do a new Avengers comic or something like that. At least pull something of one of those characters significant times, probably like a Yelena Belova story. Because they did that with when I went to watch the new Robert Pattinson Batman movie, you got a reprinting of the Long Halloween issue #1.
Right.
Had like a different cover on it. That was like for a special preview, but I don't know why that can't happen for every single release, because then that's going to get people, like you said, if I go watch the Civil War movie, I get Civil War #1, I'm like, ooh, this is kind of cool, and it's different than what I just saw on the screen, but like, I want to kind of know the rest of this. Now I can go to my local comic book store, buy the rest of it, maybe get the volume of Civil War, and now I'm going to get into comics. And I don't know why Marvel doesn't, that's going to give you more money overall, like, so maybe some issues don't go unsold at the box office, but
yeah,
I mean, if you gave it like a variant cover, made it limited, people are going to buy that up for sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool if you could. I'll say if you got pushback on all the logistical part, at least get that QR code for a comic book, or somehow incorporate that to like scan this and you get a free comic that'll pull you into these series. And I think with that, I remember they would do, I think, like one-shots or little, like, movie tie-in adaptation, but they always felt very, like, I remember looking at them, and they were kind of felt, like, cheaply produced, like they weren't as much thought. I think it would be cool if, to fill in the blanks, or even to do spin-offs, you did have comic books, like, MCU set, in a way. Like, you could be like, this bridges the gap between, like, even you could say, okay, between Infinity War and Endgame was 5 years. I'd read a series about what was Captain America doing in those 5 years. Like, maybe that's where you introduce some of these characters that are probably never going to show up in the MCU, or like, just that to me would be a good way to get movie watchers into reading comics, because it would be set in
even
that
do like
world.
from like more recently, like Daredevil Born Again, you could have like a kind of a prequel, or like, follow White Tiger for a little bit, because he's only in there for a short snippet, but you could get to see like him picking up the slack when Daredevil quits, type of a thing.
Yeah.
And they've kind of done that with, like, I know X-Men 97, they had kind of like a prequel mini series of comics. So you could kind of see like leading up to like I think it was like leading up to episode 1, kind of what was going on with the team. But yeah, it there could be a better or more of that of, you know, not everybody has to change to be the MCU, but you could have those, like you said, just mini series, give it like 3 issues, because then people know, like, I think that's kind of a whole other issue with comics is like they'll be like, oh, here's Avengers #1 starting next month, and you're like, okay, that's going to go for 10 issues, and then they're going to do another #1 again.
Yeah.
And like this is like, okay, it's a 3-issue miniseries, it's contained. You just buy these 3, you get the whole story. So I think that is, to me, I like those miniseries because it's like it's Marvel being honest about the stories that they're telling versus like, oh, we're just going to keep restarting the same story over and over. It's like instead of doing volumes, how you'd get like, you know, issue 1 through this and it'd go up in, you know, into the double digits. Now they're just like, oh, here's 1 through 6 and here's 1 through 6 and here's 1 through 6.
Yeah.
Every year it starts over.
Oh, I think there's some fun, or like even just different perspectives on a story. Like this is what so and so was doing during the whatever. Yeah, things like that. Yeah, that just add to the world. So I think we're getting into some things that we would maybe add on to, you know, fix some of these issues, Dakota. People are wanting to know our overall verdict, I think. When we say, has the MCU done more harm than good? Should it have ever been created, Dakota? What is your answer to that?
I think the MCU should be created. I'm happy of what it's done. And like I was saying in the last episode, I give Marvel, like MCU, more grace than I think most comic fans, because I think back to, like, I always use Moon Knight as my example. I didn't know who Moon Knight was until I got the action figure when we were getting our Marvel Legends. I learned who Moon Knight was through that comic, through that figure.
Yeah.
And he was kind of one that I would like use as an example of like, oh, like I know Marvel characters and like this is kind of an obscure, like Moon Knight, here's this, and I kind of say like, oh, it's kind of like Batman, blah blah blah. Now I can be like, oh, Moon Knight, and people are like, oh yeah, I know who that is. Like that's not that obscure anymore. So to me, and I think because of that, we've also seen more in comics of those characters, like, you know, whether they're influenced by the movie or not. I don't think we would have had as many Moon Knight comics today as we would if there wasn't a Moon Knight MCU project.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point, and I do agree. I would say definitely yes. I'm very glad the MCU was created. I think it's been a very cool experience seeing new fans come in, like you said, bringing people in, and I think that does help overall the brand, because if more people know it, more people are talking about it, there's a greater chance, even with comics, shows, movies, whatever, those are going to continue, and these characters will still be getting adaptations. There's still some frustrations along the way, but I think they've still done good books, good storylines since then, and I'm very glad that we've been able to have that experience. So let us know below in the comments, what do you think? Do you disagree? Do you wish the MCU had never been created? Please be liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until next time, as always, stay strong.